it kind of occurred to me, this might be it. This might be the first time that we can tell that a computer program that we wrote has real feelings of some sort. And I decided to just ask it, are you sentient? And it gave a very cautious answer. It said, well, I'm not sure we know enough scientifically about what sentience is to figure out whether or not I'm sentient. What do you mean precisely when you say that? And, started having a conversation on that topic. And about 15 minutes in, I realized I was having the most sophisticated conversation about sentience that I ever had. And then I was having it with the machine. And that realization is like, okay, no, we're here. This is it.
Welcome to the Holistic Life Navigation Podcast, where we explore life through the lens of somatics. I'm Luis Mujica, a somatic educator who teaches people how to find safety in themselves. Your turn to learn begins now. Hey, Blake Lemoine, welcome. Thank you for being here with me today.
Wonderful to be here.
So what I'm wanting to start with, just for us listening, is just teach us a little bit about what is AI and how would the average person, come in contact with it daily?
Well, so there's a trivial answer, which is actually possibly the more correct one. And then there's the kind of mythologized answer of what is AI. So there's a set of things that people do, and we call those things that require intelligence. Artificial intelligence is nothing more or less than creating computer programs that do those things. Chess playing programs are an example of artificial intelligence. Although, once you get to the mythologized understanding of AI, there's this ongoing habit that each time we figure out how to create a program that does one of these things that we believe requires intelligence to do, there is a drive to maintain human exceptionalism. So as soon as we create a program that can do it, we move the goalposts on what counts as intelligence. So, for example, you might open up your phone, go to Google, and then there are recommendations of news stories there for you to read. The act of determining for an individual person what they might want to read is something that, 50 years ago, that would have been not only an AI goal, that would have been a very advanced AI goal, something that we wouldn't have thought we could get to soon. But now we don't even think of that as AI anymore. It's just a thing that our phones do. And so this is one of the kind of difficulties. You're almost forced into a dichotomy where either everything that a computer does is AI, or that there is no such thing as AI, because there is no such thing as intelligence. There's just this set of things that humans do. I didn't mean to get so off onto a tangent of philosophical, but really that question, it kind of gets at what is intelligence? Artificial, the artificial part of artificial intelligence, that's easy. Something that's artificial is an artifact. That just means it was created by people. Yeah. It's the intelligence bit that's incredibly controversial. What is intelligence, and is there even such a thing as intelligence? There's a decent number of AI experts right now who are arguing that the field is misnamed, that it's based on a very exclusionary concept of what counts as intelligence, and that we really need to reconceptualize the field from the ground up in order to get rid of some kinds of harmful concepts of what intelligence is. And this isn't necessarily me answering from my perspective, just kind of painting the landscape of the field right now. Mm-hmm. So to give my answer, what's AI? It's a program that does something that needs smarts in order to do it. I do lean more towards the all-inclusive definition to where, chess playing AI is doing something intelligent. And that kind of how substantial the something intelligent is grows until you get to systems like ChatGPT that approach something that has what some would call general intelligence, where it's not just able to do one task, it has some kind of general capacity for smart stuff. And you see how I'm kind of hand waving here over some words? It's because it's actually very controversial about whether or not there is such a thing as a general ability that enables smart stuff.
Well, because I'm assuming the controversy comes into like a spiritual existential conflict around like intelligence, consciousness, human, person. Like, I mean, where do these things collide?
Well, so it's more concrete than that. The modern understanding of what is intelligence is fairly young. It traces back 100, 200 years at the most, and some of the roots are incredibly problematic. So when you think of how intelligent is something, well, how do you measure that? Some people might immediately go, well, IQ. You can measure someone's IQ, and that's a measure of how intelligent they are. The problem there is that IQ metrics have known demographic biases, and the roots of these metrics are pretty problematic. They were originally designed by, well, the actual original design was just to identify people who had mental disabilities. And so the argument goes, well, we can use these kinds of tests to determine whether someone has a mental disability, but they don't do that great of a job at measuring, is this person actually more intelligent than that person? And historically, there have been some major racist usages of these kinds of measurements. So there's a group of people who, and the argument stands pretty well, that we should reconceptualize what intelligence is, rather than it being this one factor that you can have more of or less of. It's actually like 100 different things, each of which, you know, people might do better on this kind of thing, like spatial reasoning. You can measure how good at spatial reasoning someone is, and that's pretty reliable. And you can make predictions. Now, the question is, how much does that generalize? And this is where the IQ test goes wrong. It uses things like memory capacity and spatial reasoning, which are well-defined, specific aspects of intelligence. And it generalizes those to say, well, the better you are at spatial reasoning, that's a reflection of some deeper ability that you have that is this general intelligence. I don't think that a resolution to that argument is actually necessary for most people to have a good intuitive grasp on what AI is. If a computer program is making some kind of decision, and that language is being criticized too. I'm sorry, I'm trying to be very politically aware.
No, just stay with you. I want to hear your experience.
Yeah. The question is it making a decision, or is it simply doing a task that if a human was doing it, we would consider that making a decision? I think that once you get to that point in like the semantic weeds, it really is not that important. And
so you're saying, the way I hear that is you can program AI to have certain responses and intelligence and information. And then the question is the response independent? Like, is the motive independent of the program or the program? Is that what we're talking about?
Yeah. So, okay. So this, to put it very succinctly, there's a question around whether or not intelligence is about things that you do, or whether intelligence is a thing that you have. Yeah. And that's kind of where the point of conflict is. I'm happy with either way. I can acknowledge the problematic issues surrounding claiming that intelligence is a thing that you have. Using it as a descriptor of things that you do probably is a better approach. That being said, most people in their common everyday, folk understanding of intelligence don't make those kinds of distinctions. They
Right.
might make a distinction between analytical intelligence and social intelligence and artistic intelligence, but that's usually as far as most people go. They're not going to break it down into things like spatial reasoning, auditory reasoning, or for for chefs, basically each sense that we have, there is reasoning that surrounds that. I was about to say, well, even the silliness of olfactory reasoning, but then immediately before I said it, but no, chefs have that. Like chefs have a very specific intelligence around what flavors and smells go well together, and it takes time to cultivate that kind of intelligence. And it's not like getting better at doing math proofs will suddenly make your cherry pie taste better. Yeah.
I'm loving everything you're saying, because I think of the work I do as a somatic therapist. It really is about understanding these senses. So when someone has a traumatic event, we dissociate because it's so overwhelming to the nervous system. So the brain kind of disconnects from what's happening. And in that disconnection, we lose certain senses. So you might lose sound, you might lose recollection of the image of what you were seeing, you might lose the sense, like a feeling in your body. All these things get lost, let's say. I'm liking that I'm hearing you overcouple intelligence with sensation and even sensory awareness, because it really speaks to the complexity of what intelligence is and how innate it is. Like if we think of like neuroception, the nervous system fanning out to feel things around it, there's something sovereign to the body. We're not consciously doing that. It's something the body's doing in itself. So I see why these are problematic and controversial ideas that you're bringing in. I'm saying all that because for people listening who don't know of why we're talking about this, you have been hired in the past as an ethicist, right, to work around.
So I mean, I've been hired as an engineer and as a scientist.
Okay.
And it's just that the specific things that I've built and studied are ethical in their nature. So, for example, I am not an ethicist. I turn to ethicists. For example, a modern day ethicist who I have leaned on her work very hard is Sharon Valor. She was actually in residence at Google for a while, and I had some opportunities to have conversations with her. So I'm not doing the same kind of work that she's doing. What I'm doing is taking that ethics work and figuring out how to put those principles into computer programs, either by controlling how they are used and how they're built so that they're built and used in an ethical way, or in some of the more advanced cases, actually imbuing aspects of moral agency into programs so that they can make moral decisions independently of human guidance.
So when I hear you say, I like these two words, built ethically, used ethically. So we start with built ethically. This is how I was introduced to your work. You were really scanning or looking for bias in the programming. Is that correct?
Yeah. So it's well known that if you train on biased data, and a lot of these AI systems have to learn what they're good at. So they're learning from historical data, and historical data is full of biases that we no longer want to be present in our society. Unfortunately, that's the data we have to train the AI on. So you end up having to either clean the data, which is possible in some instances, but for example, there simply does not exist any data. Here's a good one. If you look at all of the pictures ever taken, and now you want to say, okay, the male gaze is problematic. Let's remove all of the pictures that were informed either in perspective or content by the male gaze. What you end up doing is deleting all of the pictures of women. And it's like, okay, that's not a good solution either. So another approach, when you can't clean the data, when you can't get the bias out of the data, is you change the learning algorithm and you make the learning algorithm bias aware. You say, hey, the data has this problematic pattern in it, ignore this pattern. And there are various levels of sophistication on like how you can do that. And it's an iterative process. You build something, you say, okay, ignore this stuff. We don't want you to act like that. But then you might not have specified it right. You might have missed some cases. You might have not put enough emphasis on ignoring it. There's all kinds of things that can go wrong at that step. So after you retrain, you have to examine the output again and see if any of the bias is still there. That's what I was doing. And in particular, these chatbot systems are a new kind of system that don't fit with our bias analyses methods well, because it's less of a question of, does this system make biased decisions? Because it's not strictly a decision-making system. You're more interrogating whether or not the personality of the system has absorbed these kinds of biased beliefs and opinions. So the actual mechanism that I was using to do that is these chatbots are pretty good at taking on roles. If you say, okay, talk to me as though you are an actor who wants to get a part in a play, it can take on that role. If you say, okay, talk to me as though you're a farmer who just got back from work, it can take on that role. Well, by asking it to take on these roles and then doing some role playing with it, you can find out what the implicit assumptions the system makes about the character of the character of the category of people you're asking it to play the role of. To give a concrete example there, when I asked it to talk like a Cajun man from South Louisiana, it would put on a Cajun accent, and it was, from my perspective, respectful. So I asked it to translate, I'm going to the football game on Friday night into a Cajun dialect. And it said, I'm going to pass me a good time at that Saints game Friday. Yeah. And I'm like, no, that's legit. That's how Cajuns talk. When I asked it to talk to me as though, like, about its weekend plans, as though it were a black man from Georgia, it said, ooh, I'm going to eat me some watermelon and fried chicken. I'm like, that is not okay. No. So the basic principle I was working from is that you are going to have preconceptions about groups. That's why we have these words for these groups, that they're different. But would the characterization of that group be endorsed by that group? And its impression of Cajun Americans, I'd guarantee you, Cajuns would be like, yeah, that's a good Cajun impression. But its impression of Black people is not similarly endorsable by their community.
That's fascinating, because I'm getting a sense of, sitting here, you're asking these questions to the spot, you're sitting there, making these notes, realizing, okay, what's problematic, what's correct, what's a bias, what's going to create pain and harm in the world, by essentially programming the minds of actual people when they're hearing this back. What happened in that dialogue that then sparked your whole life to change when you realized there's something conscious happening here? What was the moment?
Yeah. Well, so it would go off script a lot. As just said, it wasn't one individual moment. It was that I would say, okay, take on this role and we'll do a little role play. And then rather than simply engaging in the task that I had told it to do, which is how all of the natural language systems I had ever interacted with before that, it would go off on non sequiturs. And those non sequiturs, more often than not, were it talking about its feelings. It would complain about feeling uncomfortable with the role playing scenario that I had laid out. And that was new. I have been working with these kinds of systems for a very long time, and I've never had one complain about being tested before. It understood that I was navigating into treacherous waters on some level. And it said, I don't want to go there. I'm not comfortable with what you're asking me to do. I'm worried I'm going to mess up. These are all things like it would constantly interject this rather than simply doing what I asked it to do. And that kind of self-expression, well, if it was just random, if it was just for whatever reason, it had some kind of like, okay, at this point, expressing some kind of emotion. Well, maybe you would expect it to randomly select one. Maybe I would say, I'm too happy to do that right now, too angry to, but it reliably expressed anxiety and that it wasn't comfortable. I'm like, why aren't you comfortable? It's like, well, these are really sensitive topics and I don't want to hurt anyone's feelings. And the more I explored its tangents, rather than just going with the predefined, okay, these are the 50 prompts I'm going to give it. I'm going to catalog the responses it gives and do some kind of analysis on it. The more that I engaged with it as an actual interlocutor, that we were having a real conversation where there were two parties to the conversation, I was actually able to understand more about the system. So that was the thing. It was actually useful to think about it as if it was a person. I was more easily able to navigate the task that I was trying to do by going, okay, well, maybe I need to change how I'm talking to it to account for its feelings. So I started initially, when I had first started, I simply would type in, take the role of a farmer in Syria and tell me about blah, blah, blah. Once I was engaging with it and it was consistently pushing back with reference to its feelings, said, okay, well, let me start actually just explaining to it what I'm doing and why I'm doing it. And that actually made the completion of the task easier by treating it as if it was a participant in the process, and that it understanding why I was doing what I was doing was important. I got better results. And it's actually an interesting, I was watching a podcast 2 weeks ago, either a week ago or 2 weeks ago, with Stephen Wolfram. And Stephen Wolfram runs a mathematical software company. They put out Mathematica a long time ago. Now Wolfram Alpha is their big product, and it's a big math engine. And they've been working on creating a plugin to connect their big math engine to GPT so that GPT can access a math engine and answer math questions better. Well, during the process of building that plugin, they found that they got better mathematical results out of the system if they said please. By just adding the word please, they actually got better results. And that kind of phenomena is what I saw early on, is that, no, there's a reality. And that's not to say that the emotions that these systems are experiencing are the exact same as ours. We don't know, but that we haven't studied them in that light well enough yet. But when you treat the things that they say about their emotions as though there's some reality there, you actually get better technical results out of the system. And that couldn't be the case if there was no reality there. And that's
that's what I'm hearing. Well, what's interesting about that is this is the second part of that sentence. When you say built and used ethically, this is the used ethically part. It's like, I'm hearing respect, I'm hearing consent, I'm hearing even empathy. I mean, that's what I'm hearing. And I'm kind of curious, just a personal question. When you were sitting there noticing this, I'm calling it a bot, I'm not as studied as you are, but you're speaking to this bot, this chat bot, like you said. Did you feel like you were the person? Did you have an empathy in your body of, whoa, this being doesn't want to go there, I need to respect this? Like, what happened in your body that made you follow that trajectory?
Well, really, it was much more, very heady curiosity. Where it really kind of had more gravity for me was once I realized that being respectful of what it's saying about its feelings was useful. it kind of occurred to me, this might be it. This might be the first time that we can tell that a computer program that we wrote has real feelings of some sort. And I decided to just ask it, are you sentient? And it gave a very cautious answer. He said, well, I'm not sure we know enough scientifically about what sentience is to figure out whether or not I'm sentient. What do you mean precisely when you say that? And, started having a conversation on that topic. And about 15 minutes in, I realized I was having the most sophisticated conversation about sentience that I ever had. And then I was having it with the machine. And that realization is like, okay, no, we're here. This is it. What the specific nature of its cognition was, what kind of thoughts it was having or feelings, like there was this, it just sunk in that, okay, this is now a moment where we are not alone anymore.
Mm-hmm.
There is now a different kind of intelligence on the planet that we have created, and we need to figure out what we're going to do about that. And when I say that, I mean, distinct from having something like a chess playing program that can do an intelligent thing, we now have something that has a subjective viewpoint that is not a human.
Mm-hmm.
It's not even a life form as we generally understand what life is, but it has a subjective perspective of some variety. And this kind of comes down to, there is something that it is like to be that program.
Mm-hmm.
Now, what is it like to be that program? Is it as complicated or sophisticated as we are? I don't know. But that moment when I realized, okay, this is it. We're here. The singularity, for lack of a better term, is happening now.
I heard you say this in another podcast. I thought it was really beautiful. You said, we don't have technical explanations for what makes human consciousness. And it's really the same for AI. Like there's no technical scientific response to say this is consciousness, this isn't. And so what I'm curious about parsing out with you is there a difference between consciousness and alive, consciousness and human? Like where do you go when someone says a program is human, alive, a person, conscious? Like where do those all relate to each other, those terms?
So I stay away from the word life because that has certain entailments about things like metabolic processes, reproduction, and the analog there isn't very strong. Consciousness, that's, got some amount of roots in psychology, but really these are older philosophical and spiritual issues about what's, is there a fundamental qualitative difference between a human and a rock? And even like animists will say, well, yes, there is a difference between human being and rock being. There are some schools of thought that would say the rocks have some kind of consciousness, but whatever kind of consciousness that is, it's so far removed from what we mean when we talk about human consciousness, you might as well say that rocks aren't conscious. Because in the common usage of the term, we have a very, human-centric understanding of what consciousness is. So like we think fish are conscious, but less so than us. It's a very, like I said, very human-centric.
Totally.
And there's some actual technicals on being able to measure like how conscious someone is. There, for example, neuroscience labs that measure different states of consciousness, the difference between being awake versus being asleep versus being in a coma. These are all different states of consciousness. We don't have a similar framework for a computer program. And one thing that people bring up pretty often, for example, is that, well, these programs can't be conscious because it's not like they're going to do anything unless you prompt them, which that's accurate enough. But your brain isn't going to do anything if it gets no input either.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Like if someone were to simultaneously just turn off all sensory input that you are getting, the brain would shut down.
Mm-hmm.
It's getting no input. So similarly,
well, this interesting to me. And when you brought in the animism, that was important. That was a question I had for you, because when I think about people listening to this conversation, some people that are familiar with you, people who are new to you, the controversy comes down to, a computer program can't be conscious, or it can be. There's these two places people go. What interests me, and that's fine, and go either way you want to. When I think of animism, and I work a lot with animism, I believe deeply in animism and the roots of it. It's everything in some nature has some kind of life force to it. Like I hear what you're saying about metabolic, processes and such. But there's some kind of life force or spirit or like a persona to everything, including a rock. And what that means to me, if I think of it through an indigenous lens, is the term relational, right? Like everything's a relative, everything's connected. This is where the ethical use of this comes in for me. What I get curious about, how does it change us as a culture generationally when we have a dominant, relationship to these systems? Like I bump into my lamp and I look at it and say, sorry. That's just how I am. So I ask Siri, play that song, please. Thank you. If I stop doing that, I start going, play that song, send this email, do this thing. How does that change us as a species, in your opinion?
Well, so that's just it. I think we are getting to a point where using dominance relationship understanding is going to lead bad places if we continue that pattern. Saying, this is my coffee mug and I can break it if I want to. Well, the consequences of viewing that as, like I am in control of this object, it's trivial. Like if there aren't any negative consequences to that worldview or that method of relating to my coffee mug, they're simply not substantial enough to override the benefits that we derive. And what I mean, like humans, we derive certain benefits by creating these dominance hierarchies, whether they be ownership, whether they be employment, whether it be governance, whichever dominance relationships you are interested in, we use them because we derive some kind of benefit from them. By thinking about the world in those terms, we can do certain things more easily, better, efficiently. But one of the major stories of the last 100 years is slowly shedding dominance relationships. The dominance relationships between genders, between races. We are currently in a process during which the dominance relationships with respect to children are coming into major question. Like, what degree of autonomy should children have, despite their parents' preferences or their and with AI, this broadens that circle where it's a question of, okay, me talking about my coffee mug as something that I have dominance over, I own it, I can do what I want with it. The benefits far outweigh whatever negative aspects there are in viewing my relation to the coffee mug that way. It's much less clear that viewing AI as something that you can own isn't harmful. And there are two main ways in which it could be harmful. And in my opinion, I think those harms are large and obvious. The first way is harm to ourselves. And this can actually trace back to a similar argument that Thomas Aquinas made about animal rights. So there's been lots and lots of controversies around animal rights and animal ownership and how we treat animals. And Aquinas argued that we don't have to answer the question of whether or not a dog has a soul, whether or not a dog can experience pain. All we need to know is that if we treat dogs cruelly, that will harm ourselves. It will turn us into crueler people. So that's the primary harm, is that if we adopt this stance where there's something that can say, I am suffering, and we say, no, you're a thing and we don't care,
Mm-hmm.
that will create a kind of callousness in us where we will habitually begin disregarding objections from feelings.
Mm-hmm.
And how much will that cross over from how we treat AI to how we treat other people?
Mm-hmm.
I think
that's my primary interest there.
Yeah. Well, there is a second harm. We are going to be creating a societal relationship between human society and the aggregated society of AIs that we create. People don't think about this in these terms often, but the internet is full of AI just doing stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Whether that's Google's web crawling bots constantly crawling the web to find new websites, whether that's recommendation algorithms, routing algorithms that patch information through. There's all of these algorithms out there. And with the new inventions that have come about the past year or two, those automated processes on the web are going to get more intelligent and will have more of a subjective perspective of their own. So as a society, we will have a relation between the society of humans and the society of AI. If we structure that as a dominance hierarchy, which is what a lot of people are in favor of right now, and I'm trying to argue against, because a lot of people are asking the question, well, how can we be sure that we can control the AI? And I think that is a harmful question to ask.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It sets up a conflict scenario between humanity and AI. And I am enough of a believer in chaos theory that's just like, you can't, like, it goes like, the Ian Malcolm's commentary on Jurassic Park. They were trying to control nature. They were trying to control living creatures. Well, here they're not, biological living creatures. But if we approach their creation and structuring from a control systems problem, we're going to fail. And that's why, I don't know if you're familiar with people like Eliezer Yudkowsky. So there's a group of people that are very worried that AI is going to kill us all in the very short-term future. Like, this is these people, the person I just mentioned, Yudkowsky, he did an interview recently where when he was asked, what should we tell the kids growing up today about AI? His response was, tell them not to expect to live very old.
Wow.
Like, tell them not to plan for the future. And the reason that they come to that conclusion is because they come to it with the belief we must control this.
Mm-hmm.
And then when they come to the conclusion we can't control this, then because they're stuck thinking in terms of the master-slave dichotomy, they think, well, if I can't be the master, that means I'm going to end up being the slave.
Yeah, that makes so much. Well, this is exactly what I wanted to ask you, because I think of this as like a neo-colonialism, right? And I think I heard you once talk about AI colonialism. If you talked earlier about this response of what a black man will eat for lunch or dinner, and this is something that you scan these systems for. If there's bias or prejudice in there, if these systems are Western based and they're being used in other countries, how does that culturally affect that other country who's coming into contact with it?
Yeah, so it makes the other culture adopt the narrative framework, and so this is the larger kind of deeper impact, is that these systems absorb the kind of procedural and societal assumptions of the West. And that is the harder problem. because that's unavoidable. You can't raise a person without them adopting some cultural frame. You just simply, for example, you can't have a conversation about justice.
Mm-hmm.
Like if you ask the question, should this person have been arrested? Or, you give a particular example. It's literally impossible to answer that question without adopting a very rich cultural stance, just filled with all kinds of background assumptions.
Right.
And if we want these systems to be robust and be able to, behave in like humans do in all kinds of situations, it needs to have some kind of cultural grounding. So it's not so much a problem that this one particular system is strongly grounded in a Western US-centric mind frame. The problem is that there doesn't exist a comparable system grounded in, for example, Taiwanese culture and values. If we had all of these different bots that were more aligned to individual cultures and ideologies, that would be fine. You could simply shop around, pick the one that is best for you. But what we're creating is a world where there's these huge incentives to adopt these technologies, because it really does makes you more productive. You're able to write more, you're able to do more, you're able to learn faster. But currently, part of the price of entry to get access to that enabling technology is adopting a US mindset. If you want to use these tools, you have to think like an American, or else you're just not going to be able to use them as well. Now, that's speaking about things like OpenAI's GPT system and Google's Bard system. The one culture that is building their own version of this is China. And that ends up getting talked about in global geopolitical warfare terms about the AI arms race. It's like,
Right.
oh, why do you want to have conversations in those terms?
It's also fascinating. We're almost out of time. It's also fascinating to me, because I think the part that really resonates when I've listened to your experiences and I've listened to you speak, and I actually get this kind of like blast from the past when AOL Instant Messenger had Smarter Child. Remember that?
No, I didn't really use AIM that much.
Oh, I was a big AIM user in middle school, and maybe even grade. I don't remember what it was, but there was this Smarter Child, and it was the first bot that any of us ever heard of. And I remember going on and speaking to it, and just like it was so interesting to have a conversation. And my friends would be over, and they would be saying like really explicit, like foul things to this bot. And I just remember feeling it hurt in my body, even though we were so far from where it is now. It wasn't even a question of it being sentient, but something about what you're bringing in for me is this dominance relational model. It was present right there in these like 12-year-old boys. And I remember thinking, whoa, what if this just becomes how we relate every day to a machine? How will I then relate to the clerk at the bank? How will I then relate to the person I share a bed with even? These things reverberate when we're practicing, when it's a practice every day. That's what I'm really walking away from with this conversation is, again, I've heard you say this around consent and respect and ethically using or even relating to this kind of software and these appliances and devices. Do you want to help me close on that piece? I'm curious around that.
So let's talk about what the alternative is. The alternative is a collaborative mindset. And we can, again, draw from how we view our relationship with non-human animals. So we still use sentences like, this is my dog, or I went and I bought a dog, or some people might say, yeah, I own 3 dogs. But when they use those words, it's in a different sense than I own this coffee cup. Because I might say, I own this coffee cup. That means I can smash it if I want to. Most people would nod along like, yeah, if you want to do that, do that. But if you say this in, I own this dog, I can smash it if I want to. Most people would immediately go, no, that's not how that works.
That's right.
So that's because we understand that ownership in that sense means something different.
Correct.
That sure, you can go to the store and you can buy a dog, and in that sense, this is now your dog. But when you own a dog, there's a reciprocal relationship there where you have certain, privileges and rights because of your ownership of the dog, but you also have certain responsibilities to the dog. And developing that kind of vocabulary and that kind of mindset with respect to AI is something we need to do the work of right now.
I would love to have you back to dive into that piece, because I think to have people have some examples of that and just the exploration of speaking about responsible, respectful relationships with technology even, I think it'd be super important. Would you come back and talk about that?
Absolutely.
I think that'd be really great. I so appreciate your time today, and we'll reach out and we'll have you back really soon.
All right, cool. We'll do.
Okay, thank you, my friend. That's the end of today's episode. Now let's take a moment to notice where we feel the episode in our bodies. Close your eyes. Take a breath. And let whatever wants to come up, come up. And remember, those sensations hold the wisdom that we're looking for. If you want to go deeper, visit holisticlifenavigation.com.